The thing with healthy aging, where diseases take 3 decades to develop, if you don't look at people over those 3 decades, you are not going to see the chicken and the egg. You're not going to see what came first, what came second, what came third.
Hi, I'm Jo Clark, and thanks so much for joining me today. This is the Redefining Midlife podcast, a podcast designed for the 40-plus woman who is determined to challenge society's myths and beliefs around midlife. It's for the woman who is inspired and ready to define midlife her way. Join me each week as I chat to health and wellness experts for up-to-date information on how to live well as some special conversations with incredible everyday women redefining what midlife can look like. Here's to making our next half of life even better than the first. Welcome to episode 94 of the Redefining Midlife podcast. Today's guest is Professor Cassandra Szoeke, and she's someone I've wanted to have on the podcast for quite some time. Her book, Secret of Women's Healthy Aging, is a much-loved member of my bookshelf, and it's got plenty of sticky notes and highlighted passage inside. Now, if anyone has attended any of my masterclasses or workshops before, you can be rest assured that I've included key information from that book. This episode is one that you need to share with your friends, your sisters, your colleagues, and your daughters, because what we talk about today can and does change lives. Professor Szoeke has got an extensive bio, and as I read her bio out loud, I'd really love you to take in everything that this incredibly accomplished woman has achieved so far. Know that what she shares today is based on groundbreaking research. Professor Szoeke is a full academic professor, clinician, speaker, and author. As principal investigator of the Women's Healthy Aging Project, which is the longest study of women's health in Australia, she authored the book Secrets of Women's Healthy Aging, which was highly commended in the Educational Publishing Awards Australia and was a best-selling title in 100 years of Melbourne University publishing in the genre of medicine. She is a general physician, consultant neurologist, and an award-winning clinical researcher. She has several hundred published articles in academic journals and several book chapters in medical textbooks. She's worked in the CSIRO, public health system, and as non-executive board director for the Department of Health. In addition to her medical qualifications and fellowship in the Royal College of Physicians, she has a Bachelor of Science with honours in genetics and a PhD in epidemiology, and her postdoctoral studies at Stanford University in California focused on the public health and policy. Her sabbatical at Oxford University focused on sex-specific medicine. Professor Szoeke has represented Australia on several major international collaborative efforts, including the Australian clinical representative role in the worldwide Alzheimer's Disease Initiative, clinical lead on the global burden of dementia, on the science advisory of the International Women's Brain Project, and inaugural lead of the Asia Pacific Node. She spent more than 2 decades working in healthy aging at the University of Melbourne, including more than a decade as Director of Healthy Aging Program at the University of Melbourne. She has worked in public and private health system in clinical leadership and governance roles as Board Director appointed by the State Health Minister. She has contributed to the development of national health policies and has sat on the Council of the Australian Medical Association, was appointed to medical panels by the Department of Health Victoria, and has held Chief Medical Officer roles for the Australian Healthy Aging Organisation and the National Council of Women. Wow, I'm just left wondering what on earth I've done with my life. Now, you are going to learn so much from Professor Szoeke in this episode, and my hope is that you're going to take something from the conversation and you're going to put that into action. And I also recommend that you buy or find a copy of her book to read, because it is a great one to have in your bookshelf. Enjoy the episode. Big welcome to the podcast, Professor Szoeke.
Thank you so much, Jo. It's great to be here.
Now, before we get into learning more about the incredible work on research findings in women's health that you've been doing for the last number of years, I'd love for you to share where your interest in this area first began.
Well, look, I studied medicine, obviously, and then, was looking at specialty training, and I decided to become a physician. So physicians, I guess are ologists. So the heart physicians are cardiologists, the brain physicians like myself are neurologists, and so on and so forth. But I really wanted to stay general. And one of the things about physicians is you study all of the different components of the body before you do your final advanced training in a subspecialty area. So I really was a very general kind of doctor. I liked all the general stuff. And so after physician's training, although they make you pick a specialty, and I picked the brain because I thought it was the final frontier of medicine, the wild, wild west of medicine. Because honestly, we know the least about it of all the organs. I mean, we can give you a fake heart tomorrow, but nobody's managed to construct a fake brain or even do a brain transplant because it's just too complex. We don't understand it enough. And so that's why that really interested me. But having specialized and then subspecialized in epilepsy, I really missed the general. And so I had done my PhD in this project. I'd done it on public health and epidemiology. And then I did a postdoc out at Stanford, really looking at public policy to improve health more generally. And then I took over this project, which had already been going for a decade, looking at midlife women, and turned it into the Women's Healthy Aging Project, where we looked at people from 60 now through to 80. And so it's been going for more than 3 decades.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. And the findings that you've covered from that study must be, do other countries look to what you've been doing and try to reproduce that within their own setting? Because it's quite groundbreaking what you're doing.
Well, you know, what I would say is there's clever doctors and researchers in every country. However, I think the success of this project has been our participants. So, you know, you can get clever doctors and researchers in every country and they move countries all the time. But participants, so in America, their 5-year retention, which means if you start a study with 100 people, how many are left after 5 years? And the answer is less than half. Whereas in our study, we had half left 30 years later. So that's really important, right? So you can't do a study for 30 years if you only have half the number of people after 5 and then half of them after 10. You'll have no one left in the study. So I think really the success of this project is down to the participants and their willingness to share stories and also their time. My goodness, you know, they spend 4 to 6 hours with us. They do neuropsych testing that pushes them to their very limits so that we can, you know, see the most subtle deficits. They've given us blood and DNA and been brain scanned and bone scanned. And, you know, I think it's the participants that have made this study truly unique. Because the other thing is, whilst in the Nordic countries, they have some really good studies going for many, many decades because they too have high retention in their studies. However, being in Australia, we also had this amazing benefit. A lot of our collaboration was with the USA. So we have cutting edge neuroimaging, biomarkers, all of those sort of things, which, you know, if you look internationally, we're the only study 30 years that has amyloid scans. We're also the only study 30 years that has now, 2 MRI brain scans, both 3 Tesla.
Wow.
Whereas when we did our 3 Tesla MRI, there was only 1 3 Tesla MRI in the whole of Melbourne. And we got to use it because we were getting that cutting edge. And it was actually at the Brain Research Institute. It wasn't in hospitals yet. We were using 1.5 Teslas in hospitals. So, you know, that cutting edge technology with our collaborations with the USA, combined with the participants who kept with us and were keen to improve the lives of other women.
That is so important, isn't it? And can you just, you shared with me before we hit record, can you share with the listeners the age of these participants now, when they started and their age now?
So when they started, they were 45 to 55 years old, and so mean age 50. And now they are mean age 80, so between 75 and 85 years old.
It's brilliant. Love it. And I'll be loving just hearing what's going to be coming out every time that you do the testing on them. It must be exciting as a researcher.
Oh, it really is.
Now, before we get into that, when did your interest become just a passion and your life's work? Because obviously you pour everything into something like this. So when did that change?
Do you know, I don't think it did change. I think from the time I decided to do medicine, you know, I did medicine to help people and make people healthier, you know, and I think when I was quite young in medicine, I was really interested in Indigenous health, and I worked in Alice Springs and Darwin. So, you know, you have this passion and these interests. And I think it was the shock in realizing that women's health in this country was so poor and we're half the population. And I was not expecting that because I grew up in a time where there was gender equity, and then came to the time where they said, well, sort of, but not.
Yeah.
And I really didn't understand how poor women's health was in comparison. And so I think really it was just a commitment to improve health. And then you look, of course, at the populations that need the most improvement.
Yes, yes. Isn't it interesting? Women seem to be getting, and they've got a platform now where they can show how unhappy and displeased they are with it. There's so many more people now just saying, it's not good enough. We want to change. And there just seems to be a grassroots movement happening from the women themselves to come through and just say, listen, we want to be heard. We want things to change. We're not happy with what it is. And maybe women of my age in their mid-50s aren't going to see the effects of it, but certainly our daughters will. The women who are younger than us will hopefully see this extra push that we're making now.
Well, look, I think sometimes you do feel that way, that doing things now might not help you, but it'll help future generations. Well, I would say it's going to help future generations, but it also helps now.
Mm.
So one of the amazing things we found in our study, because it really went 30 years and it was a longitudinal perspective, which means we followed those people for 30 years. We didn't retrospectively look or something like that. Everyone says to you, if you've got to do it in midlife, I've got to do it in midlife. If you don't do it in midlife, you've missed the boat, you've lost the chariot, And so when we were running our statistical hypothesis, with all the professors around the table, we said, well, of course, midlife is going to have the greatest impact on health. And look, I mean, we're only up to 85 now. But looking 40 years of age to 85 years of age, we actually found each and every day contributed. Each and every day. So the good news being, you can make up for what you don't do in midlife. But just remember, if you don't do it today, you do have to do twice as much tomorrow, because it is cumulative. So, obviously doing more is better, and you can make up for lost time, but you do have to do double if you don't do it before. So, start today. But, that was something that really taught me. Sometimes we do feel that we'll miss the boat, but we don't realize in the focus, we are starting to learn so much and realize that actually you can have impact at any age.
Yeah, that's empowering. And that's sort of the message that, it is wonderful that the work that you're doing now can be filtered down to us. And then for me to have you on and that gets filtered to another lot of people. So the ripple effects, it will slowly but surely happen. What I was wanting to do as we're talking through now is just to have some common definitions and concepts so everyone's on the same page. So when we say a word, we all know what we're talking about. It's not my idea of what a certain word is and somebody else's idea. So for example, let's start with the word aging. Can you tell me your definition and why we need to have a mindset shift with this term? You just did discuss that in your book, Secrets of Women's Healthy Aging, but just so you can tell the listeners.
Well, I think you make a good point, and there's no definition I can give to that word that will be everyone's definition. I think what I focus on is what is healthy aging, because I think you just can't reverse the societal and cultural impact the West has on aging. There has been such a negative thing put on aging. There's certain ages, over 70, they don't do some screening, which I think they should keep doing. So there's so much ageism in our community. How can you possibly disconnect when you're using a word that has those associations made? But I think when we talk about healthy aging, we really talk about having good quality of life. I mean, to put it in one word, to keep really simple, quality.
Yep. And,
yes, function goes with quality. We want as much function as possible. But, you could have, a young person with one leg who can still have good function and quality. So I think this focus on disability in our, kind of Western way, everyone has disabilities. Some you can't see, like personalities that don't get identified, who I think are more disabled than some of our people that might be considered. So I think we have to focus more on ability. Everybody's got abilities, just like everybody has disabilities. And I think it's a focus on ability, a focus on function and engagement and having a good quality of life.
Yep. Thank you. And let's talk about the difference between, if we talk about age span versus health span. What are those two terms and how are they different?
Yeah, so this is a kind of newer concept, and it goes along with what everyone might be familiar with, where we talk about age or bio-age. So lifespan is how many years you live on the planet. Then there's something called years of life lost, which is if you die in a car accident at 25, and in your country the mean age of death for a woman is 87, then you're considered to have a years of life lost between 87 and the 25-year car accident. Then there's something called years of life with disability. So this is you're alive, but you have poor function and poor quality. And this is often due to chronic diseases of aging, which are becoming so prevalent in our community. And, you know, WHO says 80% of those are preventable.
Mm.
And so this is where, when we're saying health span, we mean life without that reduced function.
Gotcha. Yep. And that's something important to keep in mind as listeners are continuing on with this conversation that we're having today. So the next concept I'd love to talk to you about is a holistic view of women's health and wellness. And it's one that I always share in any workshop or masterclass on women's health that I present. And this is your concept that you have, because it's such an easy visual. I think it's brilliant the way you've coined it. Bikini health versus burkini health. Why is it important that we have that distinction between bikini health and burkini health?
Well, I think that from my perspective, I'm biased. I'm a neurologist. So, you know, if you draw a picture of a woman and there's that classic triangle that people, because apparently we all wear dresses. And, you know, also when people say women's health, they often think about boobs and bits. I'm so sorry to say that on your podcast.
That's very
but often that's what people think. Whereas if you ask me what defines women's health, my answer to you is brain. 100% brain. But I am a neurologist. I am biased. I am one of the co-authors of the latest Elsevier textbook on sex differences in the brain. So, you know, I have to declare my bias, and hence the bikini. So, you know, wetsuit, I did have some battles with the editor because, you know, wetsuit is far more Australian.
Yeah.
However, it didn't include the brain, which is the most important aspect. And so hence the bikini, because it does include their head as well. It really is every aspect of our body that's so important. And I think one of the things that has undermined holistic women's health is I don't want to undermine the bits and bobs, because to be honest, that focus has meant, you know, if you look at breast cancer survival, it has just been incredible what's been achieved. And we now in our country have more than 90% survival for breast cancer. And that was only achieved because of focus. So I don't want to say we shouldn't have focused, but, you know, I do think perceiving women's health as just that has meant when a woman presents with heart disease and her symptoms are presenting differently, she's discounted. Instead of someone saying it could be different in women, which it is.
Yeah.
So, you know, we now know that the symptoms, the diagnosis, the treatments, the management, the prevention of a second heart attack, these are all completely different in women compared to men.
Yeah, and that's important for women to understand as well, that their health is just not all looking after their breast health and their getting their pap smears regularly. It's top to toe. In your book, you write, we now understand that the 3 decades before the age of 70, at least from the age 45 onwards, are the ones during which chronic diseases slowly develop, well before they lead to any changes significant enough to lead to diagnoses. So this, and it's a cruel irony, we kind of touched on it before. It comes at a time when women are often at their busiest. They're often the most stressed because they've got so much on their plate, lots of balls that are in the glass balls that they've got in the air at the one time. They decide that they don't or they can't find small pockets of time to devote to their health and wellness. But the reality is, by the time they do have it, they might be dealing with all of those daily decisions that they could have made 10, 20 years ago. But they're living with the results of them now. So that's why we need to be able to support women to find the time, so we don't have to worry about it further upstream when it's a lot harder. And as you said, you've got to work twice as hard or have that much more effort sort of down track. How do we get over that, Professor?
Well, look,
what do we
the first thing I'd say is that women at all ages don't have enough time. I guess all people will tell you at all times, because we fill our time with things. And look, women in particular, we all know that, you know, 90% of caregiving roles are done by females, but that's not just midlife females. If you look at volunteers in the volunteer workspace, they are also 80% female. So your 70, 80-year-old so-called retired, not working women are sometimes working, you know, 3+ days a week in volunteer roles. And we know this. So I think people always fill their time. We never have enough time for the things we want to do. I think it's actually the focus. So if you look at midlife women, we have a big focus. When we say women's health, what do we think of? Boobs and bits. So we go, oh my God, how's your periods? Are you getting pregnant? What's your reproductive? Oh yeah, women's health tick, women's health tick. 50, what's women's health? No one has popularized that there's anything specific around, hello, menopause, probably the most pivotal female-specific hormonal change going on, but nobody has really had a focus on that. Reproductive health, with periods and the endometriosis and PCOS, that's all, before 30, usually diagnosed. And then the reproductive time, and then postmenopausal women have not had a focus. Menopause has not had a focus. So I actually think that it's that women of midlife think, oh, well, I'm over my, menstrual issues and I'm over the reproductive now. I'm not going to have kids now at 50. Oh, thank God, I finally don't have to worry about, quote, women's health. But at some point, I'm going to have to get my breast screen. I know that happens around 55, 60. I'll start breast screening. So they actually think they're in the clear, actually, because they're told, please watch your partners, male partners, for heart disease. So there's all this, norm, the great life being at norm, where the woman, walks out to the chap in front of the TV who's overweight. Women are overweight too. I don't want to upset anyone, but she's in aerobics gear and he's overweight, and she has to look after his diet and she has to look after his exercise, and she's walking up and getting him to do things. That's the messages we've been receiving, say, in the last several decades. So why would any woman in midlife feel her role is not to look after others? And we're also told to look after our children's health. So you say again, 40, 50, you still got kids in the house. And so you're still going, oh, I've got to make sure they're eating healthy because I know that's my role. So I actually think we're telling women it's not their role to focus on their health at that age. I think we have to look at that and see that first, instead of suggesting that women somehow don't have time. I know they don't have time, but we never have time. I think it's more that women have not been told. They've not been told this is what you focus on. And the incidence of heart disease, the prevalence of heart disease, dementia, stroke. Why did I use those three? Because they're the leading causes of death in our country for women. The incidence and prevalence, it's starting over the age of 60. But as you outlined, and I wrote in my book, what I'm trying to communicate is, I know you worry about getting these things then, but they're developing in your body 3 decades before they manifest. And that's the message I think hasn't been given to women. That, yes, they probably know dementia is the leading cause of death in this country for women, UK also. They probably know that heart disease is the second leading cause of death for women, and that stroke is the third leading cause of death for women. But do they know that those things are developing from midlife through to when you get that actual attack?
So what's the answer? You've written a book. I've got a podcast where I can invite people like yourself to come on to talk about this. What else do we need to do? Like for you, you're at the front line of all of this information. So in a perfect world, what would be happening?
Wow, Jo, that's a huge question, because it's more than one question. I've got more than one answer.
Yeah.
And, I feel like just saying something really simple. If there was one thing I could do, it would be change the system. No, but seriously. So we have something called a 50-year-old health check. 45 to 55, it's a midlife health check. The government funds it. Every GP can give it to every person of that age, 45, 55. Now, the details for what you do in that health assessment in midlife is one set of instructions for both men and women. And yes, that set of instructions is based on male research for heart disease prevention. So I'm annoyed that you're getting 45 to 55-year-old women, this midlife health check, and you're not asking them about menopause symptoms. That annoys me, because hot flushes, we now know, actually a risk factor for heart disease. So even if you're just doing a heart health check or whatever you want to say it is, you still need to ask female-specific things that we now know are female-specific risk factors for these chronic diseases of aging. And so when I say change the system, I mean, like, I'll give you a specific example. There's an item number. Here it is. It's the same check for both men and women. There's no, and we know this. So I'm not even saying, which of course I would as a researcher, let's do more research. We know this. And yet it's not there. In addition, those midlife health checks are also really annoying for GPs. They're not well defined. It's not easy to get them done. And there's some like, oh, you have to this and you have to that, you know, so also simplifying it so that GPs get properly remunerated. And obviously the male one is, well, it was designed on male research. So it's very good for men. It's very good as a midlife health check for men, but having to incorporate the hormonal symptoms, because we now know hormones are very important in the development of both heart disease, dementia, and stroke. And now that we know that, you're also probably going to have to remunerate GPs because they have to ask this whole ream of other questions, which are also relevant to women.
It's not a one size fits all problem, is it? Like, there's so many different arms to this.
But, you know, if there was one thing, given we know this, how can we not be doing it? It just, it boggles my mind.
It's something to get angry about, really. Like, and again, it's not until more people start stomping their feet and reporting it and demanding certain things for a change before it's going to happen. You know, I feel your pain. It must be extremely frustrating for you guys who are in this world of knowing this information, but it's just not getting to the right people. Can you talk to me a little bit around what we're talking about with chronic diseases? When you mention chronic diseases, and you've talked about the vascular diseases and brain issues as well, brain diseases, can you just go through and talk to us about the different common types of chronic diseases? I think we've kind of touched on when they start to begin, but also how the majority are preventable. And you did give us that and I've cited that a couple of times in the podcast.
So look, I did talk about cause of death. And again, that is leading cause of death in this country and UK is dementia, leading cause of death in women. Second leading cause of death is heart disease. Third leading cause of death is stroke. But let's also talk about function, because we just said that healthy aging is not just whether you're alive or dead. What about function? And if you look at the leading causes of reduced quality of life, poor function, then you're looking at things like the arthritises, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, fractures, falls, depression. That's right up there in the top. So then if I was to say to you, did you know that 2/3 of all dementia are women? Did you know heart disease is more common in women? Did you know depression is more common in women? Did you know that osteoporosis is far more common in women? And in osteoarthritis is also more common in women. So, you know, it's almost all of those leading causes of problems, and the majority of people living with those are women.
Okay. And so can you tell me what we know from research that is going to support healthy aging? What would you say, like, obviously there's commonalities that's coming from research. For women today who are in their 40s and their 50s and beyond, what can they do on a day-to-day basis to support healthy aging?
So there's so many things that they can do. And, you know, I wrote a whole book of 50,000 words about all the things that you can do. So go to your local library. All the libraries have it. It's even in the Federal Library of Australia. So you can borrow it from anywhere. So do go read it, because I can't give you 50,000 words in a soundbite. But if there's only one thing that you do today, I'd honestly say it would be move more. Physical activity, it treats every single one of those diseases I just mentioned. And I know you're thinking osteoarthritis, but it hurts when I walk, you know. And I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm not asking you to go for a run. Movement actually is one of the good treatments for back pain, which is some of the worst osteoarthritis and really hard to treat, because we can't, you know, you can do a hip replacement, can't do a spine replacement. So we're really seeing, even in the really hard to treat issues. And I know some of you might be going, but you said depression. How would physical activity? Well, actually, physical activity helps depression, because we actually release these endorphins when we're moving. And so, like, I'm serious. If there's one thing you do today, it would be to move more. And that doesn't mean going to the gym. It's moving more for your capability, your capacity. And if you are wheelchair bound, then it's, moving your hands and taking deep breaths. And, if you're in hospital right now because you just had that hip replacement, then you do your deep breaths and those sort of movements. Whatever it is, moving more actually really helps our body, because our body is rather incredible, adapts so well. And human beings, the most adaptable, I think, of almost all organisms, if we're not going to go to viruses, but that's another story. But we are so adaptable. That's one of our strengths. But it also means if you don't move, your muscles will actually atrophy.
Yeah.
And then the body shuts down and it goes, oh, do you not need this anymore? Well, why would I have the brain functioning when half of its purpose is to move? So you've got to be careful. You don't want to, instigate a shutdown sequence of the organism.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. And again, your book deals a lot on that topic. And we've had a number of guest experts who've been coming on the podcast in recent months talking about different aspects of health and wellness as well that all contribute to living better. So ladies, make sure you grab that book and also go back into and listen to some of the other podcasts that we've had from experts before. Now, Professor, we know that women are spending at least a third of their lives post-menopause, and your book mentions again that research is showing, this is what I found interesting, post-menopause appears to have at least 3 stages, each with substages. Can you share a little bit more about that and maybe what some of that more recent research is showing?
Yep. So there's only 2 studies in the world that have kept going after menopause, and ours is the longest running and got there first too, because we started first.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Americans are the second. It's called the SWAN study, and we work very collaboratively with them, and they're huge. So we had several hundred women. They have several thousand.
Wow.
So they're huge, of course, right? And together we did the restage criteria, which was looking at what are the stages of postmenopause. And when we did that, when the women were about 70 in both studies, because remember, they're younger. They're about 10 years younger than us.
Yep.
So we did it to about 70. And so far to 70, we had stage 1, 2, and 3. But please understand there were less people in stage 2 and 3 because of the bell curve of how many people are in the study. And stage 1, we had 1A, 1B, and 1C because there were so many people we could work out there were subgroups in 1.
Wow.
And in stage 2, there were enough people that we determined there were 2 subgroups, A and B. But I will tell you, as time goes on and that study comes to our age, so that we have a large enough sample, I'm sure there's going to be sub-stages in 3 as well, for sure. But we're just getting there. We're just learning. And, people might be like, how can we not know? But, first of all, there are only these 2 studies. It's really hard to get funded for 1 study or for 3 years, let alone for 30. It is very, very hard to keep this sort of work going. And the second thing is we always forget, because we just take for granted now that the mean age of death is 87. At the turn of the 19th century, mean age of death was 50, then it was 60, then it was, and I mean, back in the 18th century, it was 25. So, mean age of death. So if you look at it only in the last 100 years, have we had postmenopausal women? Because when the mean age of death is 60, I mean, how many postmenopausal women are there? And they're all in stage 1A. So, you've got to understand we also have only had 100 years of even having enough postmenopausal women. And also that exponential rise in age, really, it's not been so long that people were just dying at 67. So, and in some countries, that is still the mean age of death. It's only ourselves, UK, America, where it's, got up to the 80s, Japan. Yeah.
And so what is that telling us? Like, what are you finding from that? Like, is there something that's comes to mind straight away when you hear, well, when you've discovered that there are 3 those different stages and there's subsets within those stages? Why is that important?
Oh, well, it's the same as when we used to say there were premenopausal women and postmenopausal women. Whereas now any woman who's gone through menopause knows when she goes just to a GP, she'll be told, well, there's the early peri, there's the late peri, and then there's the post, as well as the pre. And where you are depends on your treatment, depends on how, the symptoms and so on and so forth. So we know those stages are absolutely crucial. And so the importance of postmenopause is the stages. And look, some things we We don't exactly know, but we can hypothesize. So those studies of hormone therapy, they are old. They did use that combined horse estrogen, which we don't use anymore because it tends to clot, and, you know, all of this. And the progesterones that we used, the estrogen alone actually didn't have the side effects, and it was old preparation. So you can say a lot of negative things. But one thing about that study was it was done in significantly postmenopausally women. So the mean age was 63. So with a mean age of 63, I mean, these women hadn't had a period in 10 years.
Yeah.
So we also know in terms of those stages, 1A, B, C, 2 and 3, that we wouldn't recommend at this stage starting hormone therapy if you're 10 to 15 years after your menopause.
Gotcha.
So that's where those stages, you see, they have treatment implications, they have prevention implications. So there's a lot of reasons we need to define those things. But to be honest, we're not even through defining them.
Mm.
This area of women's health, everyone, again, very focused on reproductive years, lots of studies. Oh my God, there's not just 2, hundreds of thousands of studies on menopause across the world. But as soon as the women became postmenopausal, they stopped the study.
Are more studies happening now that this research that you're finding between you and the team in the States? Is there more interest in this area?
There is much, much more interest. There's a lot of work going on, but we have to remember that the thing with healthy aging, where diseases take 3 decades to develop, if you don't look at people over those 3 decades, you are not going to see the chicken and the egg. You're not going to see what came first, what came second, what came third. And if you only look at the end or retrospectively, and that's a lot of studies because they want the answer now, trying to retrospectively look, oh, did these people with dementia take hormones or not? Those sort of questions. But you're forgetting that there's a reason that woman took hormones. And it might be the symptoms she presented with, not the treatment. Can you see? So there's so much complication when you try and do these extrapolations. The best possible thing you can do, although it's of course the hardest, the best is always the hardest, is to follow people over time and take information about their families and their caregiving and their volunteer work, which is something our study did. So you can account for these sort of complications that are also, of course, influencing chronic diseases of aging.
Yeah. It's not a again, it's not a simple answer, is it, to something like this? So many parts to consider. Another area I wanted to talk about today was that, and your book talks about that as well. I saw firsthand the side effects that many modern prescription medications had on my own mother, and I'm sure many listeners have seen the same with their own mother, or perhaps they are experiencing themselves. There's a reason why so many drugs have adverse risks on women. Can you explain the reason to the listeners why this is the case? Because so many probably do not know this.
Right. So I think most people would be aware that in the past, women were not included in the early clinical trials. So there's 3 phases of clinical trials. Phase 1 is testing for toxicity. Then there's phase 2, and then there's phase 3 when you do what everyone knows about the randomized control trial. And women were routinely excluded, particularly from early phase trials. And then in the late 90s, the National Institute for Health in the USA did an audit and said there's no women in studies. And so they then made a mandate. They made a recommendation. Always try a recommendation first and waste some time. So they made a recommendation that women and also ethnicities needed to be included in studies. And that was completely ignored when they did their audit in the year 2000 to check whether anyone had adhered to recommendations, which they had not. And that's when they made their mandate. And they said, you cannot register a clinical trial if you do not include an equal number of men and women. But that was for phase 3. So there's still an issue with phase 2 and phase 1. We only have information from the noughties, where now all studies must require, equal number of men and women. And of course, countries are all different, right? So there's also that. But here's the big one. Unlike, is it Palmolive hair shampoo, that one where they say it won't happen overnight, but it will happen, and all these, not tested on animals and this and that, makeup's not tested on animals. All of our medications are tested on animals. For human safety, it is an absolute requirement that animal studies are done first before we would give it to a human being. all the animals have been male. The NIH had a look at that and they made a mandate. They went straight to mandate this time because they know what recommendations do. They made a mandate they have to include male animals. In what year, Jo?
Oh, when?
2016.
Oh,
So what have we got? Like not even a decade of knowledge on those early phase drugs. And everyone knows since COVID, when everyone's like, it's going to take years for a vaccine, so medications, vaccines we've been making for years, so it was much quicker. But an actual novel medication, it gets tested in animals for years, trying to prove it's not going to harm people and benefit them. Then it has to go to phase 1 for years. Then it has to go to phase 2. Then you need years of a phase 3 trial, let alone in a chronic disease that takes decades. And then it gets on the shelf. So we've not seen a drug on the shelf yet.
wow. So again, hopefully it's some women who are younger that are going to benefit from what's happening.
Well, that mandate's in, and also you can imagine now, because remember in the clinical trials they did have women. So now we can look at sex differences. So I've published a lot of papers, even on the COVID vaccine. We published a paper saying, so everyone's getting the vaccine, everyone's taking data on it, but they're not looking at the sex differences. They can, but they're not. So, you can actually specifically look, does it work better in women? Does it work better in men? Does it work equal for both? Are the side effect profiles different for either? These sort of questions are just not part of the thinking, I guess.
So is there nobody that does that then? Like you just assume when you're a consumer that there is someone who is looking out for your best interest, but clearly that's not the case. So
I think as a consumer, you're right to assume somebody's looking out for your best interest. So I think as Australian women, look at what we've seen in women's health in the last couple of years. And I don't think that it is completely unrelated to the fact we're seeing our ministers who are female leading that charge.
Yeah.
So yes, you are right to assume people are looking after your best interests as long as people like you are in decision-making positions.
Yep. Good answer. Well, there's been so much incredible information that you've shared with us today. And to finish our time, I've just got a couple of short, simple, rapid-fire questions that I usually ask my guests. So what is the number one takeaway message you would like to leave our listeners with today?
Move more and often.
Got that. I hope everyone's got that on their to-do list. Good. On a more personal note, what are a couple of your daily non-negotiables that you have for your own health and wellness?
Oh, so it is moving. Although I remember being on an interview one Sunday morning at 10 a.m. And, the guy said to me, when I said move more, he said, well, did you do your physical activity today? I said, well, actually, I bike rode to the farmer's market and got my fruit and veg and bike rode home. And I was so proud. And he went, oh, because he thought he was going to catch me out. But then I just couldn't lie. So I said, but don't ask me tomorrow. Monday to Friday, I go to work. So it was just, I know it's hard. It's really hard to fit in. So what I do personally is I like to call it incidental exercise. So I'm not good at walking upstairs, but I do try and walk down. I will park further away from where I need to go because it's less frustrating, you'll find, honestly. That's a positive side effect. And often I can walk that extra distance. So incidental things that are easy for you to do, pop them into your day wherever you can.
Yeah. I heard of a concept I love and I try to implement in my own life is exercise snacking on those days where you can't dedicate some time to do, a specific amount of time. Just those little 5-minute snatches here, 10-minute snatch there, it all adds up. It's just moving, like you said. So what are you most looking forward to in this half of life, this next half of life that we've got ahead of us, all the decades left to go?
Oh, for me personally, we have had so much cataclysmic change in women's health. For me in this field, I am so excited. Joe Biden just signed into the White House an entire initiative for women's health research. It's not just here locally. There has been an international movement and an international effort to focus. The World Economic Forum just ran a whole survey on women's economic growth and how important they are. And, I'm so excited, and businesses are getting interested and excited. I had this great company who, and I like to tell my women this, because you're always hearing this bad news. And they said, CEOs, they're interchangeable. Have one, have another, you just replace them. But our, midlife women leaving the workforce, they have the entire knowledge of that institution. They know who's who. They know which one of the 3 people to go to when you have this. They know where everything is, the stapler, that, like literally their institutional knowledge cannot be written down and cannot be transferred, whereas CEOs are interchangeable. So, the strength and the contribution women give that we all are always saying is under-acknowledged. I tell you what, it's acknowledged when you go. And there is a bit of an exodus in the workforce that has been noted by a number of companies, and it's in this World Economic Report, and it is after the age of 50. And so I think we're really getting a focus that we really need. So I'm so excited for the future.
Good. Well, your passion is clearly there. You just lit up. You went off then. All right. So on a more personal note, then what are you looking forward to for yourself? Because we've got all of this going behind the scenes. Have you got time to think about what you might like?
Well, what I really want to do is see translation. So at these junctures, you get a lot of focus, but, and I don't want to be negative, but, we've just had the pain survey. What do women think about it? I mean, this has been done nationally. It's been done internationally. It's been done before. We know women's pain is ignored. Like it's like a headline. We know this. We've known it for ages. I want to see, instead of another survey, I want to see implementation. We know so much that's not being implemented. What I really want to see is implementation. One of my personal passions is to educate, because remember, the doctors out there today who are very experienced, they were not taught sex-specific medicine because we didn't know about it 2 decades ago, let alone when they did med school. So I'm really keen to get what we call continuing medical education, and not just doctors, all health professionals, because again, they were doing uni when we didn't have any sex-specific medicine sort of courses. So really education, getting sex-specific medicine implemented into medical and health professional training, and having it also in community, because there's nothing better than a woman coming, knowing she's going to be ignored, and so being able to say, look, I understand, but. So I think education across the board, from professionals down to community people and everything in between, health services, will improve things tomorrow for every woman of every age.
Well, that will be a wonderful world when that happens. Well, let's hope and cross our fingers that it happens in our lifetime. Now, if you could look into the future, Cassandra, what do you hope 80-year-old Cassandra is going to say about current day Cassandra?
Oh my goodness. Don't ask me that. If I think back to myself in my 20s, do you know, if I really think back to myself in my 20s now, because that's the only way.
Oh, forget your 20s. You think about current days.
And you're saying 80. I thought I was 20 now.
Just think about 80-year-old Cassandra, what she's going to say about you today. What is she going to say?
I think sometimes when we're going through life and we think backwards to what we were at certain ages, we have all this great advice we'd like to give ourselves. But the truth is, our ignorance at those young ages made us do some dumb things that actually meant, we had a great benefit to people. Like, would I have worked as hard? I mean, so actually I think ignorance is bliss. And poverty in youth is also bliss. I think it makes us for good people. So I wouldn't change anything.
Good. Please. And so thank you so much for today. I've absolutely enjoyed. I was really looking forward to this conversation because your work means a lot to me, and it's changed my life trajectory as well. And on behalf of all the women who are listening, thank you for your passion. Thank you for all of the hard work that you've been doing over the years, and that you're obviously going to continue doing in the future for us, because we are the beneficiaries of it. So big thank you. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Jo. And hello, it's self-interest. I mean, it's benefiting all of us, including me.
That's why I was busting to have you on. I wanted to share everything that you
anytime
for the other women. All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jo. See ya.
See you
Bye.
later.
Thanks so much for listening and sharing your time with me today. I'd love you to hit subscribe on Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast app to keep spreading these empowering messages. Please share this podcast with other incredible midlife women in your world. Join me again next week for another redefining midlife conversation. Thanks again for tuning in.